Hi everyone, this is WWD 17 and you are most welcome for it. Last video we completed a series about percentages, and in this video we are going to start a new series about forecasting in Excel. This is going to be an introductory video to forecasting, and we're going to walk through the followings. We shall define forecasting and also forecast, and then we shall also give some examples of forecast. We shall talk briefly about the methods of forecasting. We shall also talk about what's called forecast periods, and then we shall give some importance or benefits of forecasting. So let's switch on to the main point of this video, introduction to forecasting. This is the spelling of forecasting. So let's go ahead and we define forecasting and also forecast. First of all, let's start by defining forecasting. Forecasting is actually a process of predicting future events based on past and present data. Now, what about forecast? Let's also define it. Forecast is actually a prediction or an estimate of future event or condition based on past and present data. So in simple terms, forecasting is a process of making a forecast. Now to better understand forecast very well, let's see some example of a forecast. Now the first example is saying partly cloudy skies are expected this coming weekend in Kampala. Now we have seen results like this a number of times. That one is actually a forecast. Then also, our company's growth rate is expected to increase by 10% per quarter next year. This is also an example of a forecast. Let's see one more example. The death rate is expected to drop by 5% in the next 3 years. Now, I want you to realize something. In all these examples, we are talking about expectation. We are expecting something to happen in future. Now, because of that, let's see some facts about the forecast. Forecasts tend to be more accurate when done for a near future. Now, when you predict that something is going to happen in the next months, you're most likely going to be more accurate with your prediction than when you predict that something is going to happen in the next 50 years. Also, forecasts tend to be wrong at times. Now, this is something that everyone who does forecasting always agree with. And then, forecasts can sometimes be biased. This is also true, most especially when you are doing qualitative forecasting. Now, talking about methods of forecasting, let's see the two main methods of forecasting. We have one, qualitative forecasting, and we have quantitative forecasting. Now let's dive a little bit deeper into each of them. Let's start with qualitative forecasting. What exactly is qualitative forecasting? This is when forecasting is based on subjective judgment or opinions rather than numerical data. The word subjective is actually very important there, because qualitative forecasting is when you are making prediction based on your personal opinions. An example of qualitative forecasting is when a group of top-level executives uses their collective knowledge and skills to make a prediction. They meet and then they use their experience and knowledge and skills to make the prediction. That one is actually qualitative forecasting. And then also when you ask suppliers about their future supply plans, and then you use their opinions to predict future demands. So that's actually qualitative forecasting. Let's also dive a little bit deeper into quantitative forecasting. Quantitative forecasting uses mathematical models or historical data to predict the future outcomes objectively. Now, the most important word there is objectively. This time around, we are using historical data to predict the future, not our opinion. That one is actually quantitative forecasting. A good example of quantitative forecasting is when you use the average sale for the last 5 months to predict the average sale for the next month. You're using data for the last 5 months to predict what's going to happen in the next months. That's quantitative forecasting. Now, since quantitative forecasting uses historical data, it's actually more common than qualitative forecasting. The two main methods of quantitative forecasting are, you have the causal method and then the time series analysis method. Now, let's get to know what they are, starting with the causal forecasting method. Causal forecasting approach or causal forecasting method involves studying the relationship between the variable being forecasted, which is also called the dependent variable, and the variable that affects it, which is also called the independent variable, to predict the future based on the changes in related factors. Now, you can have more than one independent variables. The causal forecasting method is normally achieved by using regression analysis. We shall talk about regression analysis in one of our future videos. Now, in order for us to understand causal forecasting method very well, let's see an example. We know that drinking water is actually related to weather. So you can predict that during hot days, the demand for water will be higher than during cold days. But remember, you need to study the relationship between weather and the demand for water. Now, in this particular example, we are predicting the demand for water. That will actually be our dependent variable, and then the weather will be the independent variable. Now the factors that affect demand for water may be more than one, not just weather. So you need to study all those factors, then you see the changes in the relationship between those factors, and you make your prediction. Because you do a lot of studies when you're doing causal forecasting method, causal forecasting is often more accurate, but also it requires more data to achieve it. Now let's talk about time series forecasting method. This is a technique where historical or past data are used to predict the future. Now since time series forecasting method highly uses past data, it's actually the most common forecasting method, and it involves methods like the mean forecast, the moving averages, the naive forecast. Then we also have linear trend forecast. Some people also do non-linear trend forecast, and the exponential smoothing. Now I'm not going to talk about all these methods here because most of our time we are going to spend on this time series forecasting method, and we're going to be talking about those methods there. Now let's also talk about forecast period. Forecast period is a time period for which you want to make forecasts, and actually they are divided into two. We have the short-term forecast period, that's like an hour to months, and also we have the long-term forecast period, that's like 3 months to years. Now of course, depending on which field you are working on, you might have different lengths for the short-term forecast period and for the long-term forecast period. For some people, 3 months to years might be a short-term forecast period, while for others it's a long-term forecast period. So it depends on which field you are working on. Now that we know what qualitative and quantitative forecasting are, let's talk about when to do qualitative and quantitative forecasting. Let's start with qualitative forecasting. You can do qualitative forecasting when you have no data or very little data is existing, or when you have the data but you don't trust that data or you don't trust the source of that data. You can also do qualitative forecasting. You might also be having the data but you don't have a skilled data analyst to use that data to do the forecasting. So in that situation, you might also be forced to do qualitative forecasting. Now what about quantitative forecasting? Since it uses data, you need to use it when you have past data, and of course when you have a skilled data analyst to use that data to do forecasting. So those are the situations where you can use qualitative and quantitative forecasting. Now lastly, before we end this video, let's talk about some importance or benefits of forecasting. There are actually very many benefits of forecasting, but we are going to talk about just some of them. We have risk management. Now when you do forecasting, you will at least have some clue about what the future is going to look like, and that one will help you to manage the risk very well. Also, when you do forecasting, it will help you to make wiser decisions because you have some clue about what the future is going to look like. Also, when you do forecasting, most especially when you are doing quantitative forecasting, it helps your company or business to stay up to date. And of course, it helps you to learn and correct from past mistakes. So those are just some of the benefits of forecasting, but there are actually very many. Yeah, that is it for this particular video here. Remember, we are going to be using Microsoft Excel to do the forecasting. So if you haven't subscribed, please do subscribe. And if you found this video interesting, give it a like, and then you share it with your friends. This is a playlist having all the videos about percentages. You can click on it, then you go and watch it. Until next video, WWD 18, then we meet again. Thank you.